Chapter 10. The war is over. The Americans are coming. Although the first German city of Aachen had been captured by the American forces in October 1944, the invasion of Germany started in March 1945, when the Western Allies crossed the Rhine River. By the time the Nazi government unconditionally surrendered on May 8th, British, French, Soviet, and American forces controlled virtually all of Germany. Americans, finding many true adherents of the Nazi Party had committed suicide, as Nazi propagandists had assured them that the American soldiers would torture and kill them. But the American soldiers also found that there was a curious absence of Nazis among German civilians. The Americans had expected that there would be a fanatical resistance, and they would have to fight them to the bitter end. Yet, to their surprise, few Germans they encountered outside the armed forces, and party administration professed Nazi sympathies. Another reason for the lack of Nazis was their relative scarcity even before the war. In the last free election in Germany, Hitler received just 1/3 of all votes cast. By 1945, only about 8 million people out of approximately 80 million belonged to the Nazi Party. Many later justified their membership by saying that they would have lost their jobs and businesses if they had not joined the party. Although the American soldiers held initially hostile attitudes towards the German population, Private Mullen of the 16th Armored Infantry Battalion told his parents after entering a German village, "We just tell the Bürgermeister, the mayor, that we want the best house in town with plenty of mattresses to sleep on, to get it, or else." Quite understandable, as they had not slept in a bed and under a roof for months. Although they were not to fraternize with the locals, they were not resisting very long. Relations between the two groups rapidly improved. GIs quickly noticed the abundance of German women and the absence of German men between the ages of 15 and 50. This quickly led to many dates. Major William Hill of the 28th Infantry Division reasoned that soldiers are going to have their fling regardless of rules and orders. GIs employed a number of clever tricks to skirt the restrictions. Some of them provided Allied uniforms for their dates to wear. Others forged documents for German women that they were displaced persons. The widespread unpopularity of the non-fraternization order made it virtually impossible to enforce. The young warriors' hormones were speaking loudly. Finally, on June 11, 1945, General Eisenhower lifted the ban on American soldiers fraternizing with children. The following month, he allowed soldiers to engage in conversation with adult Germans on the streets and in public places. Also, after the American soldiers came past the devastated rubble-strewn cities, they were impressed by the beauty of the general landscape with its dark forested hills and valleys, with smaller cities and villages looking like pictures out of a fairy tale. Castles and Tudor-style houses, for instance. The Americans are in town. After Germany surrendered, there was talk the Americans are coming to our town. How ignorant we were. In my 9-year-old mind, I had pictured the American soldiers to be little skinny men dressed in grey uniforms. I am not sure how or where I got this impression from. Our old neighbor was afraid of the Americans. They surely will attack us. He got a group of people together to make a wooden barricade across the bridge on the main road, as if this would deter a tank. The Americans must have chuckled at such feeble defenses. The tanks eventually rolled in and the Americans took over the houses along one side of several streets. One such house was the one I was born in and my grandmother owned. A neighbor across the street took her in for the present. My grandfather just had died the day before, and the bed wasn't even cold yet, she lamented. That, however, wouldn't worry the Americans, as they could not be made aware of this, as nobody spoke English. After peering over at her house for a few days, my grandmother finally asked Mama if she would go with her there to check it out. That house should be cleaned. Now my grandmother had no one close to her anymore. Mama became my Wally. All animosity seemed to have vanished. One of the occupants was John, a 6-foot-plus U.S. soldier. Like my grandmother, Mama fit right under his armpit. They were fraternizing, and he became her boyfriend. Unfortunately, he was as stingy as they come. He often would come and share our meager supper of bread, pressed oil, and onions. Very seldom did he bring a can of sardines or gave us a little chocolate bar. One time, at my grandmother's house, he gave me 3 little chocolate bars, one for me and the other 2 for Mama and Fensoma. I ate mine right away. Oh, how heavenly that tasted. On the way home, I just couldn't help myself and ate them all. When Sean found out, he never parted with his chocolate again. He could not understand the temptation he put into the hand of a kid that hardly ever had tasted chocolate in its life. That tightwad, and that he was. Mama and grandmother kept cleaning that house. One day, when John was not there, they opened his cabinet and wow, here it was stacked full of canned food and other goodies. How could Mama still want him as a boyfriend? But she was still a young woman at the age of 35 and wanted a man. Almost all young men from our little town were killed in war. So a would-be war bride could look ahead for a better life in America. The GIs were found all over the place, and we children followed them as they were something to goggle at. What? They were not skinny little men in grey uniforms? When an extremely tall American soldier, the first black man I ever saw, lifted me up into his arms, I tested my fingers on his cheek, but the black did not come off. He just smiled. At our annual Kinderfest, our school classes dressed up nicely and carrying garlands, etc., walking through town to the schoolyard. There, American soldiers would be waiting with their jeeps and gave us rides through the streets. For us kids, that was something real exciting. Waiting by the next jeep, the girls ahead of me kept waving their arms, yelling, "Me, me, me." I remember that there were about 6 or so kids per jeep. The driver picked the ones he wanted. I was standing in the back of a bunch of kids, not waving my arms, as I thought that I was not being seen anyway. I was so surprised then that the soldier pointed at me, being selected as the first. Must have been a sensitive, quiet type. John is going home. John was going home to America. He told Mama to take private English lessons and get papers for immigration to the United States. She did just that and then never heard from John again. My cousin Inge from Stuttgart had been fraternizing and marrying Bill, a soldier from Michigan. They tried to find John, whose address also was in Michigan, farther north. They found his home, and as they parked the car across the street, the reason they saw why they never heard from John again was a beautiful redhead John emerged with. Something of this nature had to be expected. Mama met another American, tall and lanky Jesse, a gentle soul. He was transferred to Frankfurt, 270 kilometers away, and Mama took up residence in Oberursel, a town 26 kilometers south of Frankfurt. Fensoma and I went visiting her once and slept in a little attic room of Mama's landladies. In the morning, my body was full of red, itchy spots. The place crawled with bedbugs. The lady informed us that while the war was still on, she could see Frankfurt all aflame after dark. The skies were lit up, and she was able to hear the far-away thunder of explosions from her house. Jesse, unfortunately, liked to drink. He was an alcoholic, but a non-violent one. He had spent several times in rehab already regarding this. Eventually, he was transferred home to the US, and Mama was to follow him. But an explanatory letter from Jesse's sister with a nice picture of herself arrived saying that the situation with Jesse was hopeless. He was in rehab again, and Mama only would be an unhappy woman. It seems Mama had no talent for picking the right man. That was it. Mama tried no more. Our little family of 3 was destined to stay that small. Of our immediate playmate group of 7 girls, all living in our street, 5 ended up on the North American continent. Gabi and her sister Lotte, from 2 doors down, became war brides, one living in Illinois, the other in Texas. Louise, Aunt Katie's sister from next door, also became a war bride to live in Florida. Margot, from the corner, went to live in California with her German husband years after the war had ended. And later about me. Our landlords. After the war was over, Schülerspeise, school meals, a generous program initiated by American charities, brought warm food daily to all classes. We all got a stainless steel cup full. Oh, was that chocolate pudding delicious! Everybody's favorite. Or the sweet rice pudding. It was a great help for us undernourished kids. Charities also supplied us with some clothing. I still remember the grey fishbone pattern woolen skirt and pullover I received. It was very warm and extremely appreciated. Even so, we were poor. I never had to run around in tattered clothes, as Mama and Oma always had practical sewing ideas. Mama and Oma sewed and I darned socks. We all liked singing and so harmonized along. Our quirky landlady, Maria, sometimes joined us. She was a character in her own right. She seldom washed herself. Whenever she left us, we had to air out the cushions she sat on. Her toilet downstairs stank to high heaven, and she swept the dust from the floor under the carpet. Under the cabinets. She also was a kleptomaniac. When we went away, we always hid the key, and in those days keys were large, to our living room and bedroom in a little basket by the stairs coming up to our rooms. It did not take long for us to detect some items missing. So the hiding place was changed to an old clothes rack under the attic stairs in the room where Fence Oma slept. The door to this room was only locked after she went to bed. During daytime, it was always open, as the owners needed to go through this room on their way up to the attic. We hung some odd clothes over top of the key. Then, ever so often, the key was in a different position. Wondering why, we found a place nobody would think to look. We regularly had things go missing, and eventually finding them in Maria's possession. For instance, a beautiful silky tablecloth with a salmon-colored border. At first Maria would say, "Oh, that is mine," but then she admitted that she only borrowed it. Now I think that my family was too trusting, downright naive, not to take the key along to wherever we went. We just never suspected in the beginning that Maria could be the culprit.